Look what happened. Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history of Make America Great Again. How can you be against it?
It is just days until Donald Trump is sworn into the presidency and Joe Biden leaves office. Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. I'm here with Rhonda Colvin, senior political correspondent, James Hohmann, columnist, and J.M. Rieger, senior video journalist. So James, Washington, D.C. and the United States are about to have this huge moment of change. What's like the biggest sign that this is coming?
My liberal friends are all renewing their passports just in case, and my conservative friends are all asking if I'm free over the weekend because they're flying in for the inauguration.
Have they had a hard time finding a place to stay?
Yes, actually. The hotel rooms are like over $1,000 for just not even fancy rooms.
JM?
I feel like
Biggest signs?
everyone's in doom and gloom over the street closures. It's like half the city easily, or it feels that way, I should say.
Rhonda, biggest sign of the change coming?
Kind of related to JM, but traffic. I noticed the last few days when I've been on the Hill, it is hard to get back here. And it's because of the traffic. It's because the street closures, the barricades are already up. You feel that tightening presence of security descending on the city. And also as a person who lives here, you know, some businesses are closed or telling you, we'll be closed all weekend, so get what you need now.
We'll be covering all the change that happens, both around the city as well as in terms of policies and personnel. And today's Sidebar, we're going to talk about the confirmation hearings that are in full swing and what we're learning, not just about the nominees, but also about how Republicans are handling this moment and how Democrats are handling this moment. We'll also take a look at Joe Biden's parting message, something that JM was covering last night and has been all week long. You know, as Biden gave an address from the White House on Wednesday night, JM, it came with a warning. And the word oligarchy, which has been trending on Google searches, and we'll talk all about what Joe Biden was talking about there. And finally, we'll do a who's who of the inauguration, who's coming and who pointedly is not coming. So let's dive right into the confirmation hearings. Rhonda, the Hill, it's like I can't keep straight which nominees are before which committees. I'm sure the staffers feel the same way because this is really a full court press to get Trump's nominees before senators and through the process.
That's right. It has been a confirmation bonanza, a whirlwind all week long. Even Wednesday had about 7 cabinet nominees in front of these committees all at one time. In fact, trying to keep track of them has been mind-blowing because I'm running out of devices trying to watch this hearing happening at this time, then using my phone to watch another one that's happening across the Senate side. And yeah, so it's been a lot. And you're right, the staffers too. I think this is a tough week for them as well.
And you know, there are some that are getting higher profile attention than others. We all were watching the very first one, Pete Hegseth, very closely. This is Trump's pick to lead the Defense Department. A lot of reasons to watch him. Number one, his nomination looked to be tanking not that long ago, before the winter break, James. It looked like he was not going to make it to this day. Donald Trump was floating replacement names. And so we've been watching this to see, like, could Hegseth get through this process successfully? How would Republicans respond to him? And how would Democrats try to poke holes in his qualifications?
And it was really revealing because Trump made it a loyalty test, and he did waffle publicly. He entertained maybe asking Ron DeSantis to take over instead. But then they sort of drew the line, and basically Trump allies were threatening the big Republican holdout, Joni Ernst, Republican from Iowa, combat veteran, who's on this Armed Services Committee with a primary challenge next year if she didn't get on board. Pete Hegseth moved her direction. He did actually really shift his position on women in combat. But she also shifted his way. And once it was clear that she was going to back him, it took a lot of the suspense out of it. But also for the, what does it say about Democrats being organized? It was interesting because I think Democrats tried, but they all were kind of hammering on the same theme, and they didn't really have a coordinated effort to really make a case against Hegseth.
But wait a minute.
Yeah.
Because Democrats went into the Hegseth hearing with a strategy. Like we were hearing about Schumer's holding a strategy meeting. Like all this talk about how they were going to coordinate and strategize. You didn't feel that?
I didn't feel it. And I think that they tried. There were 5 different senators who focused their one round of questioning, and Democrats wanted more time. They wanted more opportunities on basically women in combat. Very important issue. Understand why they all wanted to do it, but they all wanted a viral, social, sticky YouTube moment. And they weren't really able to spend a lot of time highlighting Hegseth's support for defense of war criminals, his refusal to commit to follow the Geneva Convention, to not torture people. And it felt like his lack of qualifications. There were a lot of things that weren't really emphasized. And the result was that all the coverage the next day was like Republicans versus Democrats, circus, Hegseth on the hot seat, Hegseth weathers storm. And it wasn't sort of like Democrats push this against Hegseth, and it just became this partisan brawl, which, that's something where Republicans are going to win when they have 54 seats.
If you're a Democrat going into a hearing like that, Rhonda, and really all these hearings, like what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve?
Well, here's sort of the debacle of all of this, and the hearing structure itself is when you're in the minority, there's not much you can do other than make moments that are clippable and can be shared. I noticed after, I believe it was Senator Warren went through her line of questioning with Hegseth, I saw that a clip of that, would do very well online. I saw, thousands of people click on it instantly. So I think if there is a strategy to employ, it would be trying to show that this is a problematic candidate for this job, which I think they did several times. But at the same time, even if the public may feel that, the public can't do anything about it because it's really just senators who get a choice. And if the math isn't there for the Democrats, this confirmation hearing is just really a formality.
I want to play some tape. This is Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia giving a sense of some of this back and forth and sort of how tough and fiery Democrats tried to be. Pete Hegseth was there with his third wife in attendance, and what you'll hear is a back and forth over allegations that he committed sexual misconduct, which has not been publicly talked about because there's an NDA. The woman who's accused him of that has signed an NDA. So you'll hear Hegseth trying to say he's sort of totally exonerated. That's not quite factual, but let's listen to where Tim Kaine eventually does go with it, which is really a question more about morals than about sexual misconduct allegations.
So you think you are completely cleared because you committed no crime. That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is that a complete clear?
Senator, the child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth. And she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she was, and you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges.
Well,
it was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
So Pete Hegseth is trying to focus on the allegation of sexual misconduct or assault, but he has admitted to what he says was a consensual sexual encounter with that woman. So we're talking about two different things here, but regardless, Tim Kaine is like, okay, so this woman and then this woman and this woman, it's like a triple whammy.
Yeah.
But Hegseth doesn't take responsibility for that. He just follows the Trump playbook of completely innocent, completely cleared.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to character judgment. This is someone who's going to be overseeing $1 trillion annual budget, a staff of 3 million.
And can I also point out, and the military has codes of conduct, right? I'm getting a big head nod from Rhonda,
Yeah.
like
The
which is very
Uniform Code of
different than
Military Justice.
but that's
Yeah.
very different than other departments of American government.
That's
Adultery's
exactly
a crime.
right. Yeah. And some of the things that are things that Hegseth has been alleged to have committed are things that are against what soldiers he will be overseeing have to agree not to do. So essentially, the boss at the top has potentially done things that others will be held accountable under that uniform code. And that is an interesting dynamic to have. And Yeah, it does show that character is an important part, at least, of this confirmation, and it has always really been. But in that answer, that clip that we just played, it does show you sort of the evolution that we've all experienced. Like, think of how Anita Hill was called to the Hill to discuss character issues with Justice Thomas. Think about not too long ago Kavanaugh. Like, issues of character have mattered in confirmations.
I just wonder though, I wonder though, JM. I mean, this is like the Trump thumb, right? Like if you take Trump out of this, I don't know if someone like Hegseth could have gotten through.
Yeah.
Trump's telling all the Republicans, get him through. He's my guy.
Yeah. I think the bar's been lowered even in the last few years, right? Republicans going into the Hegseth hearing were comparing this to a Kavanaugh moment, right? And that was a big, I think, pivot point in terms of loyalty, in terms of Republicans kind of closing the ranks. And yes, I think Trump going into this term, not only are the norms out the door and not only is this all a loyalty test, but his grip on the party is as strong as it's ever been. And I think this is a reflection of that.
It's like there's often a give and take, right? The president makes the choices about, or incoming president, about who they want to serve, but they're also in communication with people on the Hill who are like, ooh, bad idea, or like, this one's realistic, this one's not. There's like a lot more of that dialogue, it seems, that would happen behind the scenes in a different administration. But in this time, it's just Trump makes the decision and everyone else has to sort of get in line.
Yeah, I mean, Trump did pull Matt Gaetz when Ted Cruz, of all people, told him, this guy is not going to have the votes. You need to pull him before it becomes worse. And I will say, there was a lot of whataboutism on the Hill. Mark Wayne Mullen, this Republican senator from Oklahoma, he comes on and he says, how many senators have shown up for votes late, or have shown up for votes, late night votes, because they're drunk? And has anyone called on them to resign? Obviously, it's different running the Pentagon than like casting a vote when you've had a couple of glasses of wine. But then he also said, how many senators have cheated on their wives? That kind of thing. So there was this whataboutism, and I was struck by how many Republicans were pointing to, Tim Kaine was Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016. All these pictures of Tim Kaine with Bill Clinton in campaigning together in 2016. Obviously, Bill Clinton did do awful things with a White House intern, and so it's sort of like they're using that to excuse their side's misconduct, and it is this weird dynamic where, the reaction to Trump winning in 2016 after the Access Hollywood tape came out, in which Trump boasted about being able to get away with sexually assaulting women, was the Me Too movement. Like, it was a direct reaction to kind of the shock of the 2016 election. And it does feel like the pendulum is swinging in this sort of honestly surprising way, away from sensitivity.
Two differences I would just say on the Gaetz versus Hegseth thing, though, is one is Gaetz was being investigated by his fellow colleagues at the time. Hegseth, it's a combination of reports and a police report from X years ago. So it's a little bit different in that regard. The other thing is Gaetz was not well liked by even his Republican colleagues. And I think that becomes a little bit of a different situation than Hegseth, who I think even Ernst is a good example where he has sort of won her vote over, maybe for a variety of reasons, but has won her vote over time here. So that would be the distinction I would draw, but I think it's a good point.
Can I raise another nominee who is very much on the polar opposite side of the Matt Gaetz, sort of being reviled by all, and that's Marco Rubio, who also had a confirmation hearing this week, who you could tell is respected by his Senate colleagues, is liked by them, and even have moments of collegiality with Democrats. Let's talk about sort of how other confirmation hearings have gone this week, Rhonda, and what it reveals about sort of Trump's picks in this moment as you watch some of those other ones.
Well, I think one through line that I've seen in all of them so far is that it is, very strict adherence to loyalty to Trump. I believe these nominees are very aware he's watching the nominations or the hearings. And also the people questioning them, the Republicans questioning them, are very aware that the president-elect is watching. So I think that sense of loyalty to Trump, no matter what, has been the running theme in all of them. But there have been, different levels and different vibes almost of each of the hearings. Rubio, as you mentioned, very friendly. No one expected to be any different. They were really able to get into very, solid questions of substance about global affairs, how he'll handle something. I mean, it really went deep into the woods. Some people might have even said it might have been boring. I don't know, but
not Rhonda.
It wasn't. I did not think it was boring, but it was how a confirmation hearing often goes. those when you feel you have a qualified candidate in front of these senators. Pam Bondi also was in front of Judiciary at the same time. She actually has 2 hearings for her nomination. One's happening as we speak, but that's for witnesses who are speaking for and against her nomination. But she seemed to have a good rapport with even Democrats, although she's still really stuck to that theme of being very loyal to Trump. Some of the hard-hitting questions she kind of skirted around and said she didn't really know much about, his claims of trying to push election officials in Georgia to give him votes. She hadn't listened to the whole phone call, which was widely reported at the time. She also had to answer a lot of questions about the FBI pick, Kash Patel, by a lot of Democrats who are concerned that he will be able to do some of the things he has threatened. But overall, she appeared to be someone who was not as combative as you might have seen her when she's argued on Trump's behalf. Remember, she was an impeachment lawyer for him. But it seemed to be an easygoing, not as like Hegseth, but she still adhered to the loyalty.
So I want to play some tape of Pam Bondi at this hearing. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is asking her whether she'd use the Justice Department to go after Trump's political enemies. Why is this so relevant and important? Because Trump has said he wants to go after his political enemies. And this would be the person, the Attorney General of the United States, who he would employ to do that, either directly or just by putting it out there in the ether, and the AG would know that's what Trump wants. So let's hear how she responded to that.
It would not be appropriate for a prosecutor to start with a name and look for a crime. It's a prosecutor's job to start with a crime and look for a name, correct?
Senator, I think that is the whole problem with the weaponization that we have seen the last 4 years and what's been happening to Donald Trump. They targeted Donald Trump. They went after him, actually starting back in 2016.
Pam Bondi flipping the script and talking about, as you had said, there's an audience of one here, Donald Trump. She's towing that line, but also she's flipping it back on Democrats, James.
I think one of the things Democrats weren't sort of fully prepared for was these are experienced TV people who've spent a lot of time on Fox News, have sparred, have done a lot of panels, and Pam Bondi's made a lot of Fox hits over the years. And so she is, she was dexterous and deft about flipping the script and sort of putting it back on the other person. I actually, frankly, was sort of surprised watching by how she wasn't conciliatory at all, because it's sort of acknowledged that she's going to get confirmed and she doesn't need their support, and she's not going to get it even as she gets confirmed. Like, she was willing to sort of mix it up, and her audience is Trump. And she was, when Adam Schiff from California was asking about prosecuting Liz Cheney, she said, "Why aren't you asking about violent crime in California?" There was this kind of like,
She's giving it back.
She was giving it back, and I don't.
Oftentimes in these hearings,
exactly.
it's like, "Yes, Senator, thank you, Senator. I'll
Right.
look into that, Senator.
Right.
Like, I'll get back to you." Like, no.
And I'm sure Trump loved it.
Yeah.
And it is. It would be the moment to sort of be. It's not what you normally would do, because you normally would be like, "Well, Senator, I will follow the law. I will obey the law." Like, you just kind of keep leaning on that.
And in the role that I last had, here's how I followed the law. Like, you sort of, get out.
Right.
Dust off the resume and go back to the So, JM, what did we learn about through all of this about how Democrats are or aren't prepared for this moment of a new Trump administration? As we see how they sort of mix it up with Pam Bondi, but not to much effect. Pete Hegseth, not to much effect.
Yeah, they have limited power in this situation, right? So you kind of want to just lay out where they're coming from, and I think they maybe missed some chances. They maybe kind of hit the mark on other chances. I'm not sure, though, even if they had the perfect case, the perfect cross-examination, that it would have made much of a difference.
But what does it mean to make much of a difference? They're not going to not get the votes.
Correct. And that's what I mean by that.
Think about where Kamala Harris came from in the public mind, right? She really, she was elected at the exact same time as Trump, her to the Senate, him to the White House. And she became a household name through her questioning of Trump officials and Trump nominees on the Judiciary Committee. That's how a lot of us learned who she was and what her sort of, her prosecutor nature was.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's sort of like if you're a senator, in a situation like that, do you want to illuminate or do you want to inflame? Like,
Right.
what is the path you want to take? Like, do you want to play the inside game or the outside game? Also, he's going to get confirmed, so all of these people are going to want stuff. It's the Senate Armed
Totally.
Services Committee from the
Totally.
Pentagon, and so now, like, is Hegseth going to be more likely to return her phone call than some of the others? Like, of course.
Let's talk about the loyalty question. We talked about how Republicans are really showing their loyalty for Donald Trump in this moment through these confirmation hearings. We saw sort of a dramatic, to many of us who watch Congress, maybe not that dramatic to other people, but there's a dramatic shakeup among House Republicans. Rhonda, tell us about the Intel Committee and what happened.
So Speaker Johnson has now replaced Mike Turner, who was the person appointed to lead the House Intelligence Committee by former Speaker McCarthy. He has now been removed from that position. And one of the reasons that that's so striking is because there are murmurs that President-elect Trump asked Speaker Johnson to do it, and he did it. And that is an incredibly critical House committee chairmanship, especially at a time when there is the situation in Ukraine. We're still seeing, the flare-ups in the Middle East. The Intel committee chair in both chambers, the Senate and the House, they're a part of what you call the Gang of Eight. These are people who will have access to incredible amounts of intelligence. So for the Speaker to replace that person, I think questions are still being raised, but it was a pretty critical move. What Johnson said was he's downplayed that it was politics or that he was asked by Trump. He said we just needed to change up horses and get some new blood. And that was him saying that, not me. That's not my quote.
He's lying for what it's worth.
That's all that.
Yeah, and they did a great job. If someone's doing a great job, you don't replace them.
Right.
So what's really going on, James?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Turner said publicly that this was Mar-a-Lago and that Johnson told him this was Trump, and Johnson is denying it as he would. And then, the next day, Thursday, the day we're taping this, Johnson named Rick Crawford, Republican congressman from Arkansas, who's a lot more MAGA than Mike Turner, who's from Ohio. Mike Turner, the ousted Intelligence Committee chairman, has been one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine in the Congress. He has been one of the most outspoken defenders of NATO. And he also was the key Republican negotiating the reauthorization of what's called Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act last year. That was controversial. It divided Republicans. It is considered this key tool to collect intelligence. And there's some reporting, there's some indication that, Mike Turner was a strong independent force, and maybe some members of Trump's team wanted someone who would be more agreeable to what they're looking to do. And so this guy, Rick Crawford, the Republican from Arkansas who's replacing Mike Turner, he voted no on Ukraine funding. And he is seen as someone who will kind of go along with whatever the Trump folks want from him.
Well, when we come back, we'll talk about the move away from Joe Biden as he prepares to move out of the White House. JM will talk to us more about how Biden is assessing his own legacy. Stay with us. You're listening to Sidebar from The Washington Post. A reminder, you can also watch us on YouTube. Just look for The Washington Post. JM, Joe Biden is saying farewell this week. He's been a lot of addresses. There's been multiple addresses, but the big one was Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And he had an audience of, he hoped the nation, but an audience in person of his wife, his son, and Vice President Kamala Harris and the second gentleman, which I found to be really interesting that they were all in there with him. What is he trying to say in this moment?
It was really interesting because I think a lot of people, including myself, went into this speech last night sort of expecting him to do the usual Biden speech that we've become accustomed to. He sort of does the run through of the different things that he's accomplished and that he's touting, and expected sort of a succinct version, maybe a long version of that. And instead, he spent a significant portion of this speech last night warning the country on multiple fronts. And, it was notable because he did start off by talking about some legacy things, rattling off some things he accomplished. But the fact that he spent so much of his speech warning about all these different things was a turn I think not all of us were expecting.
JM, you're working on a piece right now for us about how Joe Biden started his presidency by talking about 4 crises that the country faced. Remind us what they were and how does he think he's done in dealing with them?
Yeah, we're talking about this tension of his legacy, right? And I think there's a tension between things that he accomplished. I think you can objectively say he got a lot done, but simultaneously the tension of his legacy in terms of his electoral success. His presidency is bookended by Trump, and he ran to vanquish Trump. But yes, the other reason he ran was these 4 crises, right? And I'll just read them off here, which was the pandemic that we were in, the economic recession that we were in as a result of the pandemic, climate change, and racial equity. And I think if you go through those, you can say that he did a lot. He passed the biggest climate bill in decades or ever in the country, right? The country recovered quicker from the pandemic, both from a health standpoint and from an economic standpoint, than anywhere else in the world. And on racial equity, he did try to pass things, appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court, so you go down the list there and you can say, okay, the things he said he was running on, he did do those things. But yes, it gets mirrored in other things that complicate that legacy, which is really the story of being a president in this country to begin with.
And it just might be an impossible job in this day and age. Like the presidency,
Right.
The country's so divided. It's a really hard job.
Right. And as we're talking about all these norms being thrown out the window, Biden is kind of likes to at least think of himself as someone representing those norms. So could have been a situation of maybe wrong person, wrong time in that sense. Like the time had passed for that day and age of those norms.
You're assessing his presidency, James, on the editorial side of the House, so we're all watching Joe Biden assess his own presidency.
Right.
We're watching, for example, the sort of ongoing attempt to get the ceasefire pushed through Israel and Hamas, and Biden and the team are sort of saying, well, we get credit, but also Trump's, we're communicating with the team. Trump's part of this. And the Trump team is like, it's all us. We did it. Like, it's because we're coming into office in just a few days. So we're seeing everybody tussle with even some of the basic things that Biden has been working on for all of these months. But there is a sort of a broader assessment going on too.
Yeah, so I trained as a historian, not a journalist, and the first thing they teach you is you can't offer a historical assessment of anything until 30 years has passed. That's and so you need 30 years and so you have to be humble that we're so close to it right now, and we're living it, and we're not seeing things. When we paid tribute to Jimmy Carter last week, one of the things that was part of his legacy that was kind of a charming part of his legacy was that his deregulatory efforts actually helped lead to the craft beer industry. And no one in January of 1981 would have been like, yeah, Jimmy Carter deserves credit for craft beer, right? So there's things Joe Biden has certainly done, good or bad, that we're too close to it. We're in the fishbowl that we can't appreciate. So that aside, but by definition, if you are a one-term president, you sort of have been rejected by the people. In this case, Biden stepped aside. He wasn't on the ballot in November, but George H.W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford. I mean, we had Herbert Hoover. A lot of these people have ultimately gotten a more positive reappraisal as history went by. They're sort of transitional figures. But I ultimately think Biden obviously wanted to be a 2-term president. So why didn't he? And this is one of the things we've been grappling with on the opinion side. We have a big editorial coming in Sunday's newspaper that assesses the Biden legacy in what I think will be a very measured way. But essentially there are 5 miscalculations that led Biden to only be a 1-term president. I think he overread his mandate when he came in. Democrats lost seats in the House. He was, it was a rejection of Trump, but he wanted to be FDR. He wanted to be Abraham Lincoln, LBJ. I think he struggled to execute. We still haven't connected any houses to rural broadband after appropriating $6 billion in 2021. They've only built 45 charging stations, even though they appropriated tens of billions of dollars to build charging stations. The plot of Afghanistan was botched. I think that they overly empowered sort of the far left. You think about someone like Lena Khan running the Federal Trade Commission. I that's not how he ran in 2020. I don't think that's what people thought they were signing up for. I think he lacked main character energy. I think he struggled to sell his achievements because he was fading. And then the fifth thing, I think it was a mistake, clearly in retrospect. This is an opinion, but to run for re-election. And that made it easier for Trump to win. And I think he would be thought of a lot more highly if he had decided to step aside and allow an open process to replace him. So, I mean, I think that there's good, there's bad, but I think that is part of the explanation for why he's a one-term president.
We'll see what the true Biden legacy is years from now. We'll probably all be retired, of course, comfortable and rested. But I will say
come
this
back
about,
and listen to this episode.
Right, exactly. But I will say about the Democrats is that one of the issues that party has had well before Biden is sort of not having an apparatus to figure out their future. Republicans always have had a good game at bringing people in young. You have the Young Republicans, which is an actual organization. I spent a lot of time talking to young Republicans across the country who were involved in their local chapter during the primary season of this election. And they get really energized very quickly at the beginning of their interest in politics, and they carry that on. Democrats often find the next replacement when it might be a little too late or, already in the middle of the game. So I think that that's something that they are confronting. They are taking a closer look at some of the younger folks in their ranks, on the Hill at least, especially in the House. So I think that there is sort of a realigning in that party of trying to figure out how do they survive, specifically in this political climate. And I also would say about any sort of measurements of legacy, right now, the scales of even assessing what works and what doesn't in politics, they're kind of broken. They're off. I mean, we're in the midst of a historic time with an incoming president who has a movement behind him that has been hard to break. So for any party to go up against that, including his own party, we know how many people have had to leave that party because they can't run against the Trump movement. I think that also is part of this discussion of figuring out what's next for the Democrats.
Yeah, well said. We'll briefly talk now about inauguration, which is happening on Monday, on Martin Luther King Day, which is not by choice. That's January 20th is the day, and it happens to fall this year on MLK Day on Monday, Rhonda. Wiggle room there? Can we move it at all? What's the?
It cannot be moved. It is in the Constitution. It's happened once before, I think, in modern history under Clinton. Clinton also was inaugurated on MLK Day. So some people may see a bit of a contrast between this president, his swearing in, and Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But I do believe there are observances across the country, here and across the country, to note that is a federal holiday.
Yeah. Let's talk about who's attending and who is not attending. So let's start with the basics. Former presidents. What's the game plan here, James?
All the living former presidents now will be there. Not all the living former first ladies will. Michelle Obama put out a statement this week through the Obama Foundation saying that she will not attend. She also did not attend Jimmy Carter's funeral.
Noting here that she would have been seated next to Donald Trump.
Exactly. And so that, I think struck a lot of people.
But we do expect like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton to come.
Totally.
And that's very noteworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Pelosi won't be there. She just had hip surgery, but she's actually been to 11 inaugurations. And her first one was JFK's in 1960. She has not given a reason for not going. But remember, she's the one she's no longer speaker, but she's the one who sat behind Trump during the State of the Union and ripped up the speech. Back in 2017, 60 House Democrats didn't go to the inauguration. They were led by John Lewis. Many of those 60 are going to be there this time. And some of it's a reflection of the fact that in 2020, there's a lot of anger among Democrats that Trump didn't go to the inauguration, that they saw it as kind of tacky, that he obviously after January 6th just sort of left town. And so they don't want to snub Trump this time. Some of it's that the way Trump is viewed has changed. Some of it is that a lot of these members who skipped the inauguration 8 years ago represent districts that Trump overperformed in this past election. And then other examples like Ruben Gallego is now a senator from Arizona. Trump carried Arizona. Well, he won the Senate race, so he didn't go 8 years ago. He's going to go this time. Catherine Clark, Democrat from Massachusetts, she skipped it last time. She says she's going this time. She's now a member of House Democratic leadership. So I actually expect there will be a lot more everyday people, but also a lot more lawmakers than during Trump's first inauguration.
And I will add that the strategy I am picking up from House Democrats is they want to start this off showing like we're here, we will extend this olive branch, and if it isn't reciprocated, then they will respond. But they are at least trying to appear that they want to start off on a bipartisan flavor.
I'm really curious to see like who goes to what balls and who does this bring into town and sort of what parts of the Republican Party are really celebrating and included in this moment, right? Who's being included from the traditional Republican ranks or not so traditional Republican ranks? We'll see. We'll be back to talk about all of it next week. We'll be recapping inauguration and looking at the very first actions that Donald Trump plans to take. By that point, maybe will have already taken as president. We can't wait to talk to you. Can't wait to see you. And the only thing standing between us and that moment is Rhonda and JM freezing in the cold on Monday because you both have outdoor assignments on Inauguration Day.
Yeah, the real feel will be 13 degrees.
Thank you. Oh my God.
So we'll see if we make it back here for next week's episode.
For those of you outside of DC who have not been obsessively watching the weather forecast, it is going to be brutally cold on Inauguration Day. And so we'll see how that affects the crowds as well as our intrepid colleagues who are covering it. Thanks, guys. For JM, James, and Rhonda, I'm Libby Casey. We will talk to you next week.